What games do you think are out / coming out that would be quote unquote too big for Steam Machine? It's kind of like riffs off your too big for Steam Deck videos that you do, Oliver. Here's the thing, right? I don't think there's really anything as such that's really going to cause problems. There are certain games that have come out where Alex has basically said on the PC versions that you can't produce optimized settings because the game just isn't optimal to begin with, and there's not really much to build on. I guess the most famous one in the past was Monster Hunter Wilds. There are going to be certain games that are demanding on what you might call reasonable settings, right? So the one that always springs to mind is going to be Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which is a game that, on the PlayStation 5, it kind of scales back to DRS range to 720p at times with an FSR2 upscale to 1440p. Now, if the PlayStation 5 is doing that, it does look a bit murky, to be frank, then I don't think the Steam Machine GPU is as powerful as PS5, so you're going to have to lower resolution still further if you want the same quality settings. But the beauty of PC, of course, is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and if you're okay with lower quality settings, then the game isn't really too big for Steam Machine. I think the issue is, Oliver, when you're talking about your Steam Deck too big for Steam Deck videos, rather. There's nothing you can do with some games. It's just you strip it back and it still doesn't run particularly well.
Yeah, I do think in this case, you have a baseline level of compute and bandwidth, capability, CPU clock, all these different things that I think you should be able to get a pretty good experience, generally speaking, relative to that too big for Steam Deck issue. Indeed, with the too big for Steam Deck findings, I never really found that an 8GB VRAM allocation was a problem there. Probably because I was operating at such low resolutions with such low settings anyways with those titles. But I think this is going to be an issue potentially at 1440p or 4K. But if you're willing to step down to 1080p, if you're willing to make certain settings compromises, like Alex noted, he was going down to low hair quality and low textures in Indiana Jones to get a pretty stable experience on an 8GB card. Those aren't cuts that you'd want to make in any circumstance, really. But they are cuts you can make to get a more stable experience, so I'd suspect those would work here just fine. I wouldn't expect games to throw up major issues with 8GB GPUs in the sense that you can always probably get an experience that's okay, at least in the vast majority of titles. But getting to that level might require some big settings cuts and big resolution cuts and things like this that you might not want to make otherwise on a machine of this capability.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is that a lot of Alex's optimized settings are kind of targeting 1440p on a 4060, which is an 8GB card, and I expect that those would transfer over quite nicely to Steam Machine, which has a similar sort of GPU budget. The difference being that, man, when you're looking at 1440p, you're leaning heavily on DLSS, and I still think that the fact that there isn't a kind of equivalent quality upscaler available yet for RDNA 3 cards is going to be slightly problematic there. But even so, I still think it'll be probably work out okay, at least for the short term. And most games should run fine. And certainly when you consider just the length and breadth of the Steam library, we are talking sort of exclusively about the sort of big AAA games here.